The morning light crept through the half-drawn curtains, casting gentle shadows across the small bedroom that would never again echo with laughter. Rose stood frozen in the doorway, her fingers gripping the wooden frame so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The room looked exactly as it had 4 days ago, colorful butterfly stickers decorating the walls, stuffed animals arranged in a neat row on the bed, and books stacked haphazardly on the nightstand. Everything was in place, yet nothing would ever be the same. Her daughter Lily had loved butterflies. "They change, Mom," she'd explained once with the simple wisdom of an 8-year-old. "They start as one thing and become something totally different." Rose had smiled then, not realizing how those words would haunt her now. The doctors had called it a rare illness, the kind that strikes without warning and progresses with a swiftness that leaves families reeling. One day, Lily had been complaining of feeling tired, with a slight fever that didn't seem particularly concerning. 2 days later, she was in the hospital. 5 days after that first complaint, she was gone. "Rose?" A gentle voice broke through her thoughts. Her husband Thomas stood behind her, his tall frame slouched with exhaustion, dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. "The funeral home called. They need to know about the music." Music? How could something so ordinary as choosing songs matter now? Rose nodded mechanically, but didn't move. Her gaze drifted to the small desk in the corner where a half-finished art project lay waiting, a butterfly mobile Lily had been creating for the school science fair. The wings were carefully painted in brilliant blues and purples, colors Lily had said reminded her of the sky just before dark. "I can't do this," Rose whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't pick songs to say goodbye to our daughter." Thomas stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood together, two broken people holding each other up because the alternative was falling apart completely. "Maybe the song from that movie she loved?" he suggested softly. "The one she made us play every morning for 3 months straight until we thought we'd lose our minds?" A ghost of a smile crossed Rose's face. She knew every word. "Every single one," Thomas agreed, his voice warm with the memory. "And she'd correct us if we got any wrong." The small town of Pine Valley had rallied around them in the days following Lily's death. Their front porch had become a collection point for casseroles, baked goods, and flower arrangements. Neighbors took turns walking their dog. Friends organized a meal train. Lily's teacher, Mrs. Chen, had called daily, offering to help with funeral arrangements or anything else they might need. Rose moved through it all like a sleepwalker, thanking people automatically while feeling completely detached from her own body. She ate only when Thomas gently placed food in front of her and insisted. She showered only when he guided her to the bathroom and turned on the water. The simple act of existing required more energy than she possessed. Their teenage son, Kevin, had retreated into a silent world of his own, spending hours alone in his room or walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. At 14, he had adored his little sister even while pretending to be annoyed by her constant chatter and questions. Now the house was too quiet, and Rose caught him several times standing in Lily's doorway, just as she was doing now. "Mom?" Kevin's voice came from behind them, unusually small and uncertain. "Grandma and Grandpa just pulled up." Rose turned, really looking at her son for the first time that morning. His hair was uncombed, his t-shirt wrinkled, but he'd put on the nice jeans they'd bought last month instead of his usual torn ones. He was trying. They were all trying to navigate this impossible new reality. "Thank you, honey," she said, reaching out to smooth his hair. He didn't pull away as he normally would have, instead leaning slightly into her touch. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll go help them with their bags." As Thomas headed downstairs, Kevin lingered in the hallway. "I found something," he said hesitantly. "In Lily's backpack." He held out a folded piece of paper. Rose took it with trembling fingers and carefully unfolded it. It was a drawing of their family, stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, Kevin, and Lily. They were standing under a rainbow surrounded by butterflies. At the bottom, in Lily's careful handwriting, "My family is the best family. I love them more than all the butterflies in the world." A sob caught in Rose's throat as she traced the childish letters with her fingertip. Kevin stepped forward and, for the first time since they'd received the devastating news, he allowed his mother to hold him as they both cried. Downstairs, the front door opened as Thomas welcomed his in-laws. Rose could hear the low murmur of voices, the sound of suitcases being set down, the familiar tones of her mother asking practical questions about the funeral arrangements. The funeral. Tomorrow. The word itself felt wrong, obscene almost, when applied to a child who had barely begun to live. "We should go down," Rose said finally, carefully refolding the drawing and slipping it into her pocket. Kevin nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I miss her," he said simply. "I know. Sweetheart, I do too." They made their way downstairs where Rose's parents were already in problem-solving mode. Her mother, Patricia, was organizing the refrigerator full of donated food while her father, Jack, was on the phone confirming details with the funeral home. Thomas was making coffee, moving through the kitchen with the mechanical precision of someone focusing on a task to avoid thinking about anything else. "Rose, honey," Patricia said, abandoning the refrigerator to wrap her daughter in a tight hug. "We're here now. You don't have to worry about a thing." But Rose worried about everything. Would Lily be cold? It was a ridiculous thought. She knew her daughter was beyond feeling temperature. But the idea of her little girl alone in the funeral home made her stomach clench with fresh grief. "The children from her class are making paper butterflies," Thomas said, handing Rose a mug of coffee she didn't want but accepted anyway. "Mrs. Chen called while you were upstairs. They want to bring them tomorrow." "That's lovely," Patricia said, rubbing Rose's back in small circles like she used to do when Rose was a child with a fever. Lily would have liked that. Would have. Past tense. Already they were speaking of Lily as someone who existed only in memory. Rose set the untouched coffee on the counter, suddenly needing to escape the well-meaning comfort of her family. "I need some air," she mumbled, heading for the back door that led to their small garden. Outside, the late spring air was warm, flowers nodding in the gentle breeze. Lily's swing set stood silent, her collection of rocks and special sticks arranged carefully along the edge of the patio. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Rose sank onto the porch steps, pressing her palms against her eyes. How was she supposed to get through tomorrow? How was she supposed to stand in front of friends and family and say goodbye to her baby girl? A flutter of movement caught her eye. A monarch butterfly, orange wings brilliant in the sunlight, landed on the railing beside her. It sat there, wings, opening and closing slowly as if it had all the time in the world. "Did she send you?" Rose whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The butterfly's wings stilled for a moment as if listening, before it took flight again, circling once around Rose's head before disappearing over the fence. Thomas found her there an hour later, still staring at the spot where the butterfly had been. Without a word, he sat beside her, his shoulder pressed against hers, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in her grief. "I don't know how to say goodbye," Rose confessed, her voice barely audible. Thomas took her hand, his palm warm against her cold fingers. "Maybe we don't," he said slowly. "Maybe we just learn to carry her differently." As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard, Rose and Thomas sat together on the porch steps. No more words were needed. Tomorrow would come with its unbearable rituals and painful goodbyes. But for now, they sat in the garden, where their daughter had played, holding on to each other as the day slipped away, minute by minute, bringing them closer to the moment when they would have to face a world without Lily in it. The day of the funeral arrived with a sky so perfectly blue, it felt like a personal insult. Rose stood at her bedroom window, watching early birds dart between trees while neighbors walked their dogs, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had. She turned away from the window and faced the black dress laid out, on the bed. It was the only black item in her closet purchased for a cousin's wedding last year. Never had she imagined wearing it for this. "Do you need help?" Thomas asked from the doorway. He was already dressed in his dark suit, his tie slightly crooked. Rose noticed but didn't mention it. Some things didn't matter anymore. "I can manage," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Getting dressed required a focus she couldn't seem to muster. Even the simplest tasks felt overwhelming. Thomas nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. Rose could hear him checking on Kevin, their voices a low murmur through the wall. Her son had barely spoken 3 sentences since they'd lost Lily, but he seemed to be talking to his father now. That was something, at least. Downstairs, she could hear her parents moving around the kitchen, preparing a breakfast no one would eat. The doorbell rang, likely the first of many visitors who would accompany them to the chapel. Rose slipped the dress over her head, the fabric cool against her skin. By the time she made her way downstairs, the living room had filled with people. Her sister Amy had arrived with her husband, both looking uncomfortable in their grief. Thomas's brother Paul stood by the fireplace, his wife Diane arranging food no one had touched on the coffee table. Mrs. Chen, Lily's teacher, was speaking quietly with Patricia, and there were others, neighbors, friends, colleagues, all dressed in somber colors, all wearing identical expressions of sympathy. "Rose," Mrs. Chen said, crossing the room to take her hands. "The children have made something for Lily." She gestured to a large basket by the door filled with paper butterflies in every color imaginable. "They worked on them yesterday. Each child made one." Rose stared at the basket, her throat tightening. "They're beautiful," she managed. "The principal has arranged for the school bus to bring those who want to attend," Mrs. Chen continued. "Their parents will meet us at the chapel." The thought of Lily's classmates, 8-year-olds trying to understand why their friend was never coming back, made Rose's heart ache all over again. How did you explain to children that sometimes life made no sense, that illness could strike without warning or reason? "It's time," Thomas said gently, appearing at her side. He looked down at the butterfly basket. "Should we take these with us?" Rose nodded, unable to speak. Thomas picked up the basket, and together they moved toward the door, the gathered mourners parting to let them through. The ride to the chapel was silent. Kevin sat between them in the back of the funeral car, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on his hands. Thomas held Rose's hand so tightly it almost hurt, but she welcomed the pain. It was real, tangible, unlike the hollowness that had taken up residence in her chest. The small chapel at the edge of town had never looked so full. Cars lined both sides of the narrow lane leading to it, and people stood in quiet groups outside, making way as their car approached. Rose recognized faces. From the school, the hospital, Thomas's office, her volunteer group at the library. Word had spread throughout their small community, and it seemed everyone had come to say goodbye to Lily. "I can't do this," Kevin whispered suddenly as the car stopped in front of the chapel. It was the first complete sentence he'd spoken to Rose since they'd lost Lily. "Mom, I can't go in there." Rose turned to her son, seeing the raw fear in his eyes. He was 14, caught between childhood and adulthood, trying to be strong but overwhelmed by a loss no child should have to face. "We'll do it together," she said, taking his hand. "Just like we do everything." Inside, the chapel was transformed. Photographs of Lily were displayed on easels. Lily at the beach building sandcastles, Lily on her first day of school, Lily holding up a science fair ribbon, Lily hugging Kevin despite his pretend annoyance. Flowers filled every available space and soft music played. The song from Lily's favorite movie, the one she had made them play every morning until they'd thought they'd lose their minds. The tiny white casket at the front of the chapel was surrounded by more flowers and the butterfly basket, which Mrs. Chen had placed there when they arrived. Rose felt her legs weaken at the sight. Thomas's arm came around her waist, supporting her as they made their way to the front pew. "The flowers are from her dance class," a voice said nearby. Rose turned to see Lily's dance teacher, Ms. Reynolds. "The pink roses, they were her favorite when we did the spring recital." More people stopped to offer condolences as they moved through the chapel. Principal Wong from the elementary school, Dr. Harris, who had fought so hard to save Lily, the librarian who had helped Lily find books, about butterflies and insects. Each person carried a memory of her daughter, pieces of Lily's life that Rose hadn't witnessed but now treasured. As they settled into the front pew, Kevin between them, Rose looked back at the gathering. The chapel was filled beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and in the back. Through the open doors, she could see more gathered outside, listening through speakers that had been set up. Lily's classmates filed in, each wearing a paper butterfly pinned to their shirts or dresses. Their parents guided them to seats reserved near the front, some children crying openly, others looking confused and frightened. One little girl clutched a well-worn stuffed butterfly that Rose recognized as a gift from Lily on the child's birthday. The minister, Pastor Jim, who had known their family for years, moved to the front of the chapel. He had baptized both Kevin and Lily, had been there for family celebrations and now their deepest sorrow. "We gather today," he began, his voice gentle but carrying through the space, "to remember a life that brought joy to so many. Lily was only with us for 8 years, but in that brief time, she touched countless hearts." Rose listened as Pastor Jim spoke of Lily's kindness, her curiosity, her love of nature and books and dancing. He talked about her volunteer work at the library, where at only 8 years old, she had helped younger children with reading. He mentioned her passion for butterflies and how she had raised monarchs in her classroom, teaching her friends about metamorphosis and migration. Throughout the service, Rose remained dry-eyed, her grief beyond tears now. She sat rigidly, Kevin's hand in hers, Thomas's arm around her shoulders. Various people spoke. Mrs. Chen shared stories from the classroom. Dr. Harris talked about Lily's bravery during her brief illness, and a school friend read a poem the class had written together. Then it was time for the slideshow. Thomas had spent hours selecting photos, arranging them to the music Lily had loved. As the lights dimmed and the first image appeared on the screen, Lily as a newborn, tiny and perfect in Rose's arms, a collective sigh seemed to move through the chapel. The photos traced Lily's brief life, her first steps, holding Kevin's hands, blowing out candles on birthday cakes, dressed as a butterfly for Halloween, reading to younger children at the library, performing in school plays, hiking with Thomas, baking cookies with Rose, building snowmen with Kevin. Each image was a moment, frozen in time, a reminder of what they had lost. As the final photo faded, Lily in their backyard, arms outstretched as if ready to fly, the chapel fell silent. The only sound was the soft crying of children and adults alike. Pastor Jim returned to the front. "And now," he said, "we will have a moment for anyone who wishes to share a memory of Lily." One by one, people stood. A classmate talked about how Lily had stood up to a bully on his behalf. The librarian recalled how Lily had organized a reading corner for younger children. A neighbor described how Lily had helped care for injured birds they'd found in their yard. With each story, Rose felt her daughter's presence more strongly. Lily had touched so many lives in her short time. She had made a difference. As painful as this gathering was, there was also a strange comfort in hearing how much her little girl had been loved by others. The service was nearing its end. The final hymn had been announced. Amazing Grace, Lily's grandmother's favorite. As the way music began and the congregation rose to sing, Rose felt a shift in the atmosphere. The simple melody filled the space, voices joining together in a song about loss and hope and grace. It was time for the pallbearers to approach. Thomas would be one of them, along with Rose's father, Thomas's brother, and a close family friend. As they moved toward the small white casket, Rose felt the moment approaching, the moment when they would take her daughter away for the final time. The reality of it hit her with physical force. This was goodbye. This was the last time she would be in the same room as her child. This was the end. As the pallbearers reached the casket and prepared to lift it, Rose felt something inside her begin to crack. The careful composure she had, maintained throughout the service, started to crumble. Her breath came in short gasps. The hymn faded from her awareness. All she could see was the tiny white casket that held her baby girl. For the first time since they had lost Lily, Rose felt herself losing control. The final notes of Amazing Grace hung in the air as the pallbearers stood ready beside Lily's small white casket. Thomas's face was a mask of controlled grief as he took his position, his knuckles white as he gripped the polished wood handle. Rose watched from the front pew, her body rigid, her breathing shallow. Beside her, Kevin stared straight ahead, his young face stripped of all emotion. For days, Rose had moved through her grief like someone walking underwater, slow, muffled, disconnected from the world around her. She had accepted condolences with mechanical nods. She had made funeral arrangements in a fog of disbelief. She had chosen her daughter's final outfit, the blue butterfly dress Lily had worn to her last birthday party, with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. But now, as the pallbearers prepared to carry her daughter away for the final time, something deep inside Rose began to fracture. A pressure built in her chest, pushing against her ribs, climbing up her throat. The careful walls she had constructed to get through this impossible day began to crumble. Pastor Jim nodded. To the pallbearers, we will now proceed to the graveside for the committal service. The men lifted the casket, and as it rose from its stand, a sound escaped Rose's lips, part gasp, part moan. She hadn't meant to make a sound at all, but her body betrayed her. The noise seemed to startle everyone, cutting through the solemn silence of the chapel. Kevin turned to look at her, alarm flashing across his face. In the 4 days since they had lost Lily, he had never seen his mother lose control. Rose had been the steady one, the one who remembered to feed the dog, to thank the neighbors for casseroles, to make sure Kevin had clean clothes. Even Thomas had broken down sobbing in the shower, thinking no one could hear him. But Rose had remained upright, moving forward one robotic step at a time. Now, as the pallbearers took their first steps toward the chapel door, something in Rose snapped completely. She lurched to her feet, the movement so sudden that several people gasped. "Wait," she said, her voice cracking. "Please wait." The pallbearers froze, uncertain. Thomas looked back at his wife, his eyes wide with concern. Rose stepped into the aisle, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I'm not ready," she said, louder now. "I'm not ready to say goodbye." The chapel fell silent. No one moved. No one seemed to breathe. Rose took another step forward, then another, until she stood beside the casket. She placed her hand on the smooth, white surface, feeling the cool wood beneath her palm. "She's my baby," Rose said, her voice breaking. "She's just a little girl. She's too young to be alone." Thomas carefully set down his corner of the casket and moved to Rose's side. "Honey," he whispered, placing his hand on her arm, but Rose shook him off. "No," she said louder now, her voice echoing through the silent chapel. "This isn't right. None of this is right. She was fine 2 weeks ago. She was playing in the yard. She was reading books. She was alive." Tears began to stream down Rose's face, the first she had shed in public since Lily's death. "She's afraid of the dark," she continued, her words tumbling out between sobs. "Did you know that? She still sleeps with a nightlight. Who's going to make sure she has a nightlight now?" A collective sound of grief moved through the gathering, a mixture of sighs and stifled sobs. Mrs. Chen pressed a tissue to her eyes. Several of Lily's classmates began to cry openly. She had plans, Rose continued, her voice rising with a desperate energy. She was going to be a butterfly scientist. That's what she called it, a butterfly scientist. She was saving her allowance to buy a special camera to take pictures of them. She had a jar with $4.37 on her dresser. Rose's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to her knees beside the casket, one hand still resting on its surface. "She had a loose tooth," she whispered. "It never fell out. She was so excited about losing it, the tooth fairy never came." Thomas knelt beside his wife, tears flowing freely down his face now. He didn't try to stop her or quiet her. He simply placed his arm around her shoulders, sharing in her broken open grief. "Not my baby," Rose cried, pressing her forehead against the casket. "Please, not my baby." The raw honesty of her pain cracked open something in the chapel. People who had been containing their grief out of respect or uncertainty now gave themselves permission to feel it fully. Soft cries echoed throughout the space. Even Pastor Jim wiped tears from his eyes. Kevin, who had remained frozen in the front pew, suddenly stood and walked toward his parents. At 14, he was caught in that awkward space between childhood and adulthood, trying so hard to be grown up. But now, watching his mother's grief pour out like water through a broken dam, he let go of his pretense of maturity. He knelt on Rose's other side and buried his face against her shoulder, his body shaking with silent sobs. For several minutes, the three of them huddled together beside Lily's casket, their private grief now witnessed by everyone who had come to say goodbye. No one tried to hurry them or suggest they continue with the service. There was an unspoken understanding that this moment, raw and painful as it was necessary and right. Finally, Rose lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to say goodbye to her." An elderly woman in the second row stood up slowly. Rose recognized her as Mrs. Wilson, who lived 3 houses down and who had often watched Lily after school. "You don't have to say goodbye," Mrs. Wilson said, her voice wavering with age but strong with conviction. "Not really. She'll always be your daughter. Nothing changes that. Not even death." From another part of the chapel, someone else spoke up. A man Rose didn't recognize. "My son died 20 years ago," he said. "He was 6. I still talk to him every day." Then another voice, and another. People began to share their own experiences with loss. Children, siblings, parents. Stories of grief that had seemed unbearable, but had somehow been born. Tales of how they had found ways to carry their loved ones with them through the years. As Rose listened, still kneeling beside the casket with Thomas and Kevin beside her, she felt something shift inside her chest. The pain didn't lessen. If anything, it grew sharper, more defined. But alongside it grew a sense that she wasn't alone in this terrible journey. Others had walked this path before her. Others had survived what felt unsurvivable. Slowly, with Thomas's help, Rose got to her feet. She took a deep, shuddering breath and placed one last kiss on the top of Lily's casket. "I love you," she whispered. "I'll always love you." She turned to face the gathering, suddenly aware of how public her breakdown had been. But instead of embarrassment, she felt a strange sense of relief. The careful facade she had maintained had shattered, revealing the truth of her pain. And in that truth, there was an odd kind of freedom. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice hoarse from crying. "Thank you for loving our daughter with us." Pastor Jim stepped forward, his kind face wet with tears. "Shall we continue?" he asked gently. Rose nodded. The pallbearers, including Thomas, resumed their positions. This time, as they lifted the casket, Rose didn't fight the tide of grief that swept through her. She let the tears come, leaning on Kevin for support as they followed the casket down the aisle. The procession moved slowly through the chapel and out into the bright sunlight. The contrast between the somber interior and the vibrant spring day outside was jarring. Birds sang in nearby trees. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and flowering shrubs. The world continued its business, oblivious to their pain. The small procession made its way to the cemetery adjacent to the chapel. Chairs had been set up beneath a green canopy, the tiny grave already prepared. Rose sat between Thomas and Kevin, her parents behind her, a solid presence at her back. As Pastor Jim began the graveside service, Rose's gaze drifted beyond the canopy to the cemetery itself. It was peaceful here, well tended, with flowers blooming between the headstones. In the distance, a massive oak tree spread its branches, offering shade to several graves beneath it. Rose found herself thinking that Lily would have liked climbing that tree. The thought brought fresh tears to her eyes. There were so many things Lily would never do now, so many experiences she would never have. The weight of all those lost possibilities pressed down on Rose's heart. Pastor Jim's voice brought her attention back to the service. He was reading a poem about butterflies and transformation, about beauty that doesn't end but simply changes form. The words washed over Rose, familiar yet distant, like a song heard underwater. Around them, Lily's classmates fidgeted in their chairs, some crying quietly, others looking confused and frightened by the intensity of adult grief. One little girl kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting Lily to appear at any moment. As the service continued, Rose felt herself drifting again, her mind unable to stay present for this unbearable moment. She thought of Lily's room at home, still exactly as she had left it. The half-finished butterfly mobile, the collection of rocks on the windowsill, the bookmark stuck in Chapter 7 of Charlotte's Web, which they had been reading together before bed. Would she have to pack those things away? The thought made her physically ill. But could she bear to leave everything unchanged, turning Lily's room into a shrine? There were so many impossible decisions ahead, so many moments when grief would ambush her anew. The sound of people rising to their feet pulled Rose back to the present. The service was ending. It was time for the final goodbye. Rose stood on, shaking legs, clutching Thomas's hand so tightly that her fingers ached. The final prayer ended, hanging in the air like mist. Rose stood at the edge of the small grave, a white rose clutched in her trembling hand. Thomas stood beside her, his arm around her waist, supporting her, as he had done throughout this impossible day. On her other side, Kevin stared down at the polished white casket, now adorned with flowers from those who had come to say goodbye to Lily. "If you would like to place your flower," Pastor Jim said gently, "we'll conclude our service." Rose took a step forward, then hesitated. Placing the flower felt so final, like the period at the end of a sentence. Once she let go of this rose, her last physical act for her daughter would be complete. What came after that? How did she step away from this grave and return to a world where Lily no longer existed? Behind her, she could hear sniffles and quiet sobs from the gathered mourners. Lily's classmates huddled with their parents, many clutching the paper butterflies they had made, unsure what to do with them now. Mrs. Chen stood nearby, her normally cheerful face drawn with sorrow. Rose closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped to the edge of the grave. "I love you, sweet girl," she whispered, and let the rose fall. It landed soundlessly on the casket, the white petals stark against the polished wood. Thomas followed with his own flower, then Kevin. One by one, the mourners came forward, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, neighbors, friends. Each added their flower, some whispering words too quiet for Rose to hear, others simply bowing their heads in silent farewell. As the last of the adults placed their flowers, Mrs. Chen gently guided Lily's classmates forward. The children approached, in a hesitant group, some crying openly, others solemn and confused. Each carried their paper butterfly, carefully crafted in bright colors. "We made these for Lily," a small boy explained, his voice wavering, "because she loved butterflies." "She taught us about how caterpillars change," added another child, a girl with glasses too big for her face. "She said they go into cocoons and come out different but still the same." Mrs. Chen smiled through her tears. "Lily was our class expert on butterflies," she explained to Rose and Thomas. "She gave a presentation just last month." One by one, the children placed their paper butterflies atop the flowers. Some were elaborate with glitter and sequins, others simple with wobbly lines colored outside the boundaries. Each was made with care, a final gift for their friend. As the last child stepped back, a small commotion arose at the edge of the gathering. Rose looked up to see a woman she didn't recognize struggling with a wheelchair. In the chair sat a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, with a sweet round face and the distinctive features of Down syndrome. The girl was clutching something in her hands and seemed determined to get closer. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, her voice strained as she navigated the wheelchair over the uneven ground. "Beth insisted we come. She was in Lily's reading group, at the library." The memory clicked into place for Rose. Beth, of course, the little girl Lily had read to every Tuesday afternoon as part of the library's buddy reading program. Lily had talked about her often, describing how smart Beth was and how much she loved stories about animals. "She's been asking for Lily," the woman, Beth's mother, explained as they reached the edge of the canopy. "I didn't know how to explain. I thought maybe being here might help her understand." Beth looked up at Rose, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Where's Lily?" she asked, her speech slightly slurred but perfectly understandable. The simple question hit Rose like a physical blow. How did you explain death to a child who saw the world so differently? How did you make sense of something that made no sense at all? Before Rose could find words, Beth held up what she'd been clutching, a paper butterfly, more beautiful and intricately folded than any of the others. Unlike the simple cutouts the classmates had made, this was an origami butterfly, its wings delicately creased in shades of blue and purple. "I made this," Beth said proudly. "For Lily." Rose knelt down beside the wheelchair, bringing herself to Beth's eye level. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice cracking. "Did you make it all by yourself?" Beth shook her head, a small smile appearing. "Lily showed me, before she got sick. She said butterflies are special, 'cause they change but they're still the same, inside." Rose felt something shift inside her chest, not the lifting of grief which remained heavy and absolute, but a small opening, like a crack in a door letting in a sliver of light. "Can I put it with the others?" Beth asked, looking toward the grave with its blanket of flowers and paper butterflies. "Of course you can," Rose said, helping Beth out of her wheelchair. The little girl took a few unsteady steps, leaning on Rose for support. Together, they approached the grave. Beth looked down at the casket, then up at Rose, her face suddenly uncertain. "Lily's in heaven now," Beth said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. Rose swallowed hard. "Yes," she said, because it seemed the simplest answer, the one that might bring the most comfort. Beth nodded, accepting this with the straightforward faith of childhood. She leaned forward, carefully placing her origami butterfly atop the others. "Bye, Lily," she said simply. "Thank you for teaching me butterflies." As they turned to head back, a flutter of movement caught Rose's eye. From a nearby flowering bush, a real butterfly emerged, a monarch with brilliant orange wings streaked with black. It circled once, twice, then landed directly on Beth's origami creation. A collective gasp went up from the gathering. The butterfly sat there, wings slowly opening and closing as if it had found exactly where it belonged. "Look," Beth cried, pointing with excitement. "Lily sent a real one." The childish certainty in her voice broke through something in Rose. A laugh escaped her, a sound so unexpected, so out of place at a funeral, that several people looked at her in alarm. But the laugh wasn't bitter or hysterical. It was a sound of wonder, of connection, of something that felt almost like joy slicing through the heavy blanket of grief. "Maybe she did," Rose said, surprising herself with the words. The butterfly lingered for a moment longer, then took flight again, circling the grave once more before disappearing into the clear blue sky. The gathered mourners watched its path, a collective stillness falling over them. Then, as if the butterfly had broken some invisible barrier, other children began to approach. A small boy with thick glasses tugged at Rose's dress. "Lily helped me learn to read," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She never got mad when I got the words wrong." Before Rose could respond, another child stepped forward, a girl with long braids and a serious expression. "Lily stood up for me when Joey called me names," she said. "She said I was smart, and Joey was just jealous." One by one, children approached. From Lily's class, from her dance group, from the library program. Each had a story to share, a moment when Lily had touched their lives in some small but meaningful way. "She shared her lunch with me when I forgot mine. She showed me how to make friendship bracelets. She helped me with math when I was confused. She said my drawing was the best even though it wasn't." Rose listened, amazed. In her grief, she had seen only what she had lost, her bright, beautiful daughter with all her future possibilities. But here, in these simple childhood memories, was evidence of what Lily had already accomplished in her brief life. the kindnesses she had shown, the differences she had made. Thomas moved to stand beside Rose, his hand finding hers. "She was, just like you," he whispered. "Always thinking of others." A small girl with curly red hair approached, clutching a worn book. "Lily was teaching me to read this," she said, holding it out to Rose. "We got to chapter 3. Rose recognized the book, The Secret Garden, one of Lily's favorites. She had mentioned reading it with a younger child at the library, but Rose hadn't realized how important these sessions had been. "Would you—" Rose had to stop, clear her throat. "Would you like me to continue reading it with you? Where you and Lily left off?" The little girl's face lit up. "Yes, please," Lily said. "It gets really good in chapter 4. Suddenly, other children were crowding around, sharing similar requests. "Can you help with the butterfly garden we were planning? Lily was going to teach us origami. Do you know how? We were supposed to have a reading club this summer. Can we still do it?" Each request was a thread, connecting Rose to her daughters, life beyond their home, to the community Lily had been building in her own small way. Each offered a path forward, not away from grief, but alongside it. A way to carry Lily with her. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes. "Lily was organizing a buddy reading program," she explained. "Pairing older students with younger ones. She was quite insistent about it." A small smile touched her lips. She could be very determined when she had an idea. "She gets that from her mother," Thomas said, his voice warm with love and pride. For the first time since Lily had been taken to the hospital, Rose felt something besides numbness and pain. It wasn't happiness. That seemed impossible, right? Now. But it was something like purpose, like connection. A sense that Lily's story wasn't ending here at this grave, that there were ways to continue the good she had begun. Beth, who had been quietly observing from her wheelchair, suddenly spoke. "Up. Lily said I'm a good reader now," she announced. "She said next time I could read to her." Her face clouded with confusion. "But if she's in heaven—" Rose knelt beside the wheelchair again. "Maybe you could read to another friend," she suggested, gently. "Someone who needs help just like you did." Beth considered this, her forehead wrinkled in concentration. Then she nodded decisively. "I could teach someone else, like Lily teached me." "Taught," her mother corrected automatically, then looked embarrassed. But Rose smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Just like Lily taught you." As the children continued to share their stories, something remarkable was happening around the grave. What had begun as a solemn, grief-stricken farewell was transforming into something else, a celebration of a life that, though brief, had touched many others. The children's natural honesty cut through the formal rituals of mourning, bringing Lily's spirit vividly present among them. Pastor Jim, watching from nearby, stepped forward. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "we might gather at the community hall rather than continuing here. There seems to be much to share about Lily's life that could benefit from a more comfortable setting." Rose looked at the growing circle of children, at Beth with her origami butterfly, at Kevin, who was actually smiling as he listened to a boy describe how Lily had defended him on the playground. She looked at Thomas, whose face reflected her own wonder at this unexpected turn of events. "Yes," she said. "I think Lily would like that." 3 weeks after the funeral, Rose stood in the doorway of Lily's bedroom, a feather duster in her hand. She hadn't changed anything yet. The butterfly mobile still hung unfinished from the ceiling. The collection of rocks and pine cones still lined the windowsill. The purple bedspread was still rumpled exactly as Lily had left it that last morning. For 21 days, Rose had avoided this room except for brief, painful visits, standing in the doorway, unable to step inside, as if crossing that threshold would somehow make Lily's absence more real. But today was different. Today she had a purpose. "Are you sure you're ready?" Thomas asked, appearing behind her. His voice was gentle, without pressure. Rose nodded. Beth and the other children are coming tomorrow. I need to find Lily's butterfly books and her origami paper. She took a deep breath and stepped into the room. The air felt different in here, not musty or stale as might be expected in an unused room, but somehow preserved, as if time had stopped on that terrible day 3 weeks ago. Rose ran her fingers along Lily's bookshelf, scanning the colorful spines until she found what she was looking for. 3 books about butterflies and 1 about origami. Here they are, she said, pulling them out carefully. She kept her special paper in the desk drawer, I think. Thomas watched from the doorway, understanding that this moment, Rose willingly entering Lily's room to gather items for a purpose, represented a significant step. Since the funeral, something had shifted. The grief hadn't lessened, it still crashed over them in unexpected waves. But alongside it had grown something else, a determination to honor Lily's memory in a way that felt meaningful. The day after the funeral, Beth's mother had called. Beth couldn't stop talking about Lily and the origami butterflies. Would it be possible, she wondered hesitantly, for Rose to show Beth how to make more? Other parents had called too, sharing how their children wanted to continue projects Lily had started: the buddy reading program, the butterfly garden at school, the collection of books for the children's hospital. Somehow, without planning, Rose and Thomas had found themselves saying yes. Yes to continuing what Lily had begun. Yes to keeping her spirit alive through actions rather than just memories. Rose opened the desk drawer and found the special origami paper, shimmering sheets in blues, purples, and greens, Lily's favorite colors. Beneath them lay a notebook Rose hadn't seen before, its cover decorated with hand-drawn butterflies. "What's this?" she murmured, lifting it out. She opened to the first page and felt her breath catch. In Lily's careful handwriting was the title, My Butterfly Project. Below it, a list of goals. Learn to make 10 different butterfly origami designs. Teach 5 friends how to make at least 1 design. Start a butterfly garden at school. Raise money to help save real butterflies. Maybe become a butterfly scientist someday. Rose sank onto Lily's bed, the notebook trembling in her hands. Thomas crossed the room and sat beside her, peering over her shoulder at their daughter's writing. "Oh," he said softly. The following pages contained drawings, notes about different butterfly species, lists of plants that attracted them, and instructions for origami designs copied carefully from books. There were names of friends Lily planned to teach, ideas for the garden, even a simple budget for seeds and plants, she'd dow. "Had it all figured out?" Rose whispered, turning the pages slowly. She was only 8, but she had all these plans. The last filled page stopped mid-sentence. "Mrs. Chen says if we get enough people interested in the butterfly garden, we could apply for a special grant from the town to make it bigger. I think we should try because butterflies need more places, too," and that was it. The rest was blank, waiting for words that would never come. Rose closed the notebook gently, holding it against her chest. "We need to finish this," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "All of it." Thomas nodded, his eyes shining with tears. "We will." The community hall hummed with activity. Tables had been set up around the room, each dedicated to a different project. Children moved between them, accompanied by parents who watched with a mixture of sadness and hope. At the origami table, Rose sat with Beth and 5 other children, demonstrating how to fold paper into butterfly shapes. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, showing each fold. "Lily always said to crease it really well," she explained, pressing firmly along the fold line. "That makes the butterfly stronger." Beth, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, mimicked Rose's movements. "Perfectly." "Like this?" she asked, holding up her half-completed butterfly. "Just like that," Rose smiled. "You're a natural, just like Lily said." Across the room, Thomas and Kevin worked with another group of children, plotting out designs for the butterfly garden that would be planted at the elementary school. Kevin, who had been so withdrawn in the days following his sister's death, was now explaining to a wide-eyed second grader how monarch butterflies migrated thousands of miles. "Lily told me that," the little boy said. She said they go all the way to Mexico. Kevin nodded. She learned that from a book we got at the library. She read everything she could find about butterflies. At another table, Mrs. Chen helped children write letters requesting donations of butterfly-friendly plants from local nurseries. Nearby, the librarian organized sign-up sheets for the buddy reading program that would now be called Lily's Readers. Rose looked around the room, amazed at how Lily's simple projects had brought together so many people. It wasn't just children. Adults from throughout the community had volunteered to help, offering expertise, materials, and time. The high school biology teacher had promised to help with the butterfly garden. A local artist offered to paint a butterfly mural on the school wall. The town council was considering naming a small park after Lily. Mrs. Walker? A small voice pulled Rose back from her thoughts. A girl about Lily's age stood before her, clutching a completed origami butterfly. Is this right? Rose examined the paper creation. It's perfect, Olivia. Lily would be so proud of you. The girl beamed. Can I make another one? I want to make one for my grandma. She's been sad because her friend died. Of course, Rose said, pushing the paper toward her. Take whatever colors you like. As Olivia selected new paper, Rose felt that now familiar mixture of grief and gratitude wash over her. The pain of losing Lily would never disappear. There would always be birthdays not celebrated, milestones not reached, a future unlived. But alongside that pain had grown this unexpected gift, the discovery of how her daughter had touched others and the opportunity to extend that touch further. Thomas appeared at her side, resting a hand on her shoulder. How are you holding up? He asked quietly. I'm okay, Rose said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Not okay in the sense that everything was fine. It wasn't and never would be completely, but okay in that she was surviving, breathing, finding moments of purpose amid the grief. Kevin's doing really well with the garden planning, Thomas said. He's talking about adding a special section for the caterpillars. Says they need safe places to form their chrysalises. Rose smiled. He used to pretend he wasn't interested when Lily talked about butterflies, but he listened to everything she said. We all did, Thomas said softly. A commotion at the door drew their attention. Beth's mother was helping her daughter navigate her wheelchair through the entrance, both of them beaming with excitement. We have news, Beth called out, her voice carrying across the room. Show them, Mom. Beth's mother held up an official-looking letter. The Children's Hospital approved our request, she announced. They're giving us space in the courtyard for a butterfly garden and they want the kids to design it. A cheer went up from the gathering. This had been part of Lily's bigger dream, to create butterfly gardens not just at her school but throughout the community. The hospital garden would be seen by children facing their own health battles, bringing color and life to a place that often felt sterile and frightening. There's more, Beth's mother continued once the excitement quieted. They want to name it Lily's Garden. They asked if that would be okay with you, she added, looking at Rose and Thomas. Rose felt tears spring to her eyes, not the hot, painful tears of grief that had become so familiar, but something softer, touched with sweetness. She would have loved that, she managed to say. Can we put a sign up? Beth asked. With butterflies on it? And her picture? Added another child. I think that would be perfect, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. 6 months later, on what would have been Lily's 9th birthday, Rose stood in the center of the hospital's courtyard, surrounded by fluttering wings. The butterfly garden was in full bloom, attracting dozens of the delicate creatures. Children, from the hospital, some in wheelchairs, others trailing IV poles, watched in delight as butterflies landed on bright flowers. A small brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight. Lily's Garden, where hope takes flight. Beside it hung a weatherproof frame containing the last page of Lily's notebook, her unfinished sentence now completed by her classmates. Butterflies need more places to land so they can rest and be safe on their long journey, just like people do. The Buddy Reading Program had expanded to 3 libraries across the county. The school butterfly garden had won a state award for environmental education. And Rose had found herself becoming something of an expert on butterflies, learning alongside the children who came to her with questions Lily would have answered. The grief still came in waves. There were still days when Rose couldn't get out of bed, when the unfairness of it all felt too heavy to bear. There were still nights when she woke gasping from dreams where Lily was alive and well, only to face the crushing reality of mourning. Thomas still had moments when he would abruptly leave a room, unable to contain his sorrow. Kevin still sometimes wore Lily's favorite scarf, wrapped around his neck like armor against a world that had taken his sister. But alongside the grief had grown this garden, not just the physical one with its flowers and butterflies, but the wider garden of community, purpose, and meaning that had sprouted from Lily's brief life. Beth wheeled up beside Rose, her lap full of origami butterflies she had made for the hospital children. "Do you think Lily can see the garden from heaven?" she asked, her face serious. Rose looked up at the clear blue sky, where a monarch butterfly was soaring higher and higher until it was just a speck against the vastness. "I think she can," she said. "I think she sees all of it." "Good," Beth said, with satisfaction. "Because we did a really good job." Rose smiled, feeling the familiar mix of heartache and love. "Yes," she agreed, watching as another butterfly emerged from a chrysalis hanging from a nearby plant, its wings still damp and new, ready for first flight. "We really did."